We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA.
Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
Welcome back to Notify America. YouTube is still the largest streaming platform in the world. They have such reach and dominance in the space that it's amazing other companies like Rumble even stand a chance. By the way, thank you for following me over there. Well, apparently, YouTube's updating their sensitive content policy in 2024. According to this email that an advertiser received, check this out. I'll read this and try to translate as to what I think it actually means. They write this: in February 2024, Google will update the inappropriate content policy to clarify the definition of sensitive events. A sensitive event is an unforeseen event or development that creates significant risk to Google's ability to provide high-quality, relevant information and ground truth. All right, remember that term, ground truth. They say this: and reduce insensitive or exploitative content in prominent and monetized features. During a sensitive event, we may take a variety of actions to address these risks. Examples of sensitive events include events with significant social, cultural, or political impact, such as civil emergencies, natural disasters, public health emergencies, bad acts, conflict, or mass acts of bad behavior. So basically, breaking news, any breaking news events around the election, for instance, if an October surprise were to drop later this year, what do you think would happen? Would that fit into this category, into this bucket of not matching what Google considers to be ground truth? We saw this play out in 2020 with the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post had their article and content removed from all major social media sites, heavily censored, shadow banned in other instances. Twitter went as far as to suspend their account entirely until they deleted the link to the article. They did that because the establishment, corporate media, and the fact checkers said it wasn't true, that it was Russian disinformation. Of course, that was all crap. We now know that it was true. It was Hunter's laptop, but the damage was already done. Same thing regarding the Cove. If something like that happens again, a new pandemic, I'm sure that'll qualify as well. People giving their opinions on the establishment narrative will be outside of the ground truth, which is what the problem is here. So who's coming up with this ground truth? The people and entities that are looked to as deciding what is true or not are the people who at this point have the least credibility, in my opinion. Here's Al Gore talking about this very issue, ground truth, what he refers to, though, as a shared base of knowledge. Watch this.
To one based on broadcasting and then moving on to the internet and to social media has disrupted the balances that used to exist that made representative democracy work much better. Because a free self-governing people rely on a shared base of knowledge that serves as a basis for reasoning together collectively. But if you have social media that is dominated by algorithms that pull people down these rabbit holes that are a bit like pitcher plants, these algorithms, they are the digital equivalent of AR-15s. They ought to be banned. They really ought to be banned. It's an abuse of the public forum. But when people are pulled down these rabbit holes, you know what's at the bottom of the rabbit hole? That's where the echo chamber is. And if you spend too much time in the echo chamber, what's weaponized is another form of AI, not artificial intelligence, artificial insanity. I'm serious.
So a shared base of knowledge, he says. Now, he said a bunch of stuff over the years that he would want to claim were part of our shared base of knowledge. For example, he said one time there's a 75% chance the entire North Polar ice cap would be gone by 2016, that it would be gone by 2016. Something like that, right? A statement like that demands action, though. A statement like that, if it was our shared base of knowledge, would mean we all agree on that and we move forward to try and solve the problem. That's some major policy action. Maybe even AOC's Green New Deal in order to address it. Well, 2016 was 8 years ago, and there's still the North Polar ice cap, it's still there. Look, independent media is critical to the American experience. It's foundational. Freedom of the press, that doesn't mean corporate press. It means anyone with a voice, any independent journalist, and nowadays, anyone with a social media account. And these independent journalists, content creators like Breaking Point's Redacted, Tim Pool even, the Daily Wire, the Young Turk, some of these people have completely different ideological perspectives, folks. They disagree on policy, but their voices are critical. All of our voices are critical to form a real, genuine reality. Not an invented reality, but a real reality. And it's these creators who will be penalized by this, and smaller accounts like this one as well. It's actually much easier for YouTube to target a small account than a larger one, which is why X is so damn important. It's as close to a free speech platform as you're going to get, and it's shocking that they haven't done more to just tear it down yet. I mean, they've ramped up their ad boycotts on X. That's why you'll notice that SpaceX is like the main advertiser now. Elon's filled those lost advertiser blocks with his Starlink product, which is good. It's got to replace the income somehow. But these ad boycotts that we hear about, just so odd when you think about it. If you were an advertiser, would you really care if your ad shows up next to a controversial post? I personally wouldn't. Normally, advertisers can choose which types of content they want to pay for, categories. They choose categories, right? If I choose to pay for my ad to be shown in the news and politics bucket, why would I care if my ad shows under a video about Hunter Biden or about J6? I wouldn't. It's all so controlled. They have such a stranglehold around the internet today. It's just wild. So think about it. Sensitive events, such as war, like the Israel-Hamas war or the Russia-Ukraine war. This would mean only approved talking points allowed. You won't get alternative perspectives and unfiltered content anymore, and it will be enforced that content, the alternative content, when that content's most needed. For example, anti-war voices during the start of the war, for instance. So incredibly important. When the Ukraine-Russia war broke out, people talking about the history of these two countries' relationships and the U.S.'s role, NATO's role in instigating conflict by expanding NATO membership, there were people in government calling that Russian propaganda. So whose ground truth are we really listening to? Well, Vivek Ramaswamy was interviewed by Mike Benz yesterday, and he was asked about this specific issue, tech censorship. Watch this.
All right, we are riding with Vivek here, and the question is what are you going to do to take on internet censorship?
Look, first thing you got to realize is it's not big tech censorship. We got to call it the right thing. The first step to solving a problem is to name it. It's government tech censorship. That's really what this mostly is. The government's using tech companies to do through the back door what the government could not directly do through the front door under the Constitution. That's illegal behavior. And so I was the first person to write about this, or along with another law professor, in January of 2021, right in the days and the aftermath of January 6th. I argued that what tech companies were doing right then, censoring speech, censoring Trump and otherwise, was at the direction of government actors that were causing them to censor content that otherwise couldn't be censored directly through the front door, and that it was illegal. Back in 2021, it was dismissed as a conspiracy theory at the time. Now we know the reality is far worse than we imagined. That's illegal behavior. I think any government bureaucrat that has instructed a private company to do something that the government couldn't do directly needs to be held accountable. So Elon did it with Twitter, released this Twitter files. I'm going to release in first year the state action files. Anytime a government bureaucrat has pressured a private company to do something the government couldn't do directly, we're going to publish it, and we're going to hold the bad actors accountable. So that's how I'm going to deal with that.
Great. That's actually a really engaged response. What I want to immediately ask is
one more policy matter on this is Section 230 needs to be turned into an opt-in statute. So there's Section 230 C1 and C2. Forget C1 for a second. C2 says that these companies cannot be sued under state laws. There are many states that have laws that say you can't discriminate against somebody based on their political viewpoint. Section 230 C2 says, notwithstanding those state laws, a tech company can't be sued for doing it because there's a federal law that gives them a federal blanket of immunity. My view is you can't have it both ways. So if you want to be a private company, that's fine. Operate as a private company, but you don't get that liability wrapper. Just the same thing the way they do it for the vaccine manufacturers, by the way. But if you want the liability wrapper in the tech company's case, then you're bound by the same constraints. as the federal government, including the First Amendment to the Constitution. So I know it was a little technical, but I wanted to give you, it's an important part of the answer.
Will you commit to going agency by agency in the federal government? Everywhere from the FBI, the DHS, the National Science Foundation, DOD, State Department, agency by agency, killing every single government grant and contract related to domestic mis and disinformation.
Yes. That's an easy, I thought this was going to be a harder question than that.
Well, I just...
Yes.
And
that was an easy one.
Okay, now onto the advertising issue. One of the things that's happening right now that's choking out platforms is the weaponization of advertiser dollars in order to kill things to misinformation sites. So, for example, there's a company called NewsGuard which purports to assign news nutrition labels to independent websites. Now, it turns out, while they call themselves an independent rating system, on their board is Michael Hayden, former head of the CIA, NSA, four-star general. Rick Stengel, who was Obama's propagandist in chief in the State Department, who was the head of the Global Engagement Center, which is the censorship arm there. Tom Ridge, the head of DHS, and Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the head of NATO. So you have this sort of, just like you were saying, it's a government intermediate thing. But they assign news nutrition labels to websites like Epoch Times and One American News, whatever. They say, oh, you are fake news, essentially, and then they operate in a cartel-like fashion with the World Economic Forum's advertising arm, GARM it's called, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, and their goal is to kill $2.6 billion in programmatic ad spend to websites who are deemed to be fake news, and it all targets either conservative or left-wing anti-war voices, basically anybody who doesn't belong to the DC Uniparty. And this is a cute new trick that they are using to try to kill the messengers, because they can't stop all the messages. So my more targeted question to you is, do you have a plan for being able to deal with the issues around the use of these mass boycott type activities when there is a government nexus, and will you commit to trying to take on the news cartel formation that's happening right now around the ad space and online news?
So the answer is, when there's a government nexus, yes. And I can tell you're very thoughtful about this. The way you framed that question was the right way to frame it. When there's a government nexus, yes. I don't want the government being in the business of telling nonprofits who are auditing what they can and cannot do, because that would then be weaponized to use against us, which is what we actually need, is some kind of Center for Media Accountability that's actually neutral, as opposed to the World Economic Forum stooge version of it. So that's on us. I mean, our movement has not created something to hold the media accountable. The media is supposed to hold the government accountable. They failed to do that. Who's holding the media accountable? The answer right now is nobody, other than these pretend pop-up organizations. So the World Economic Forum is poison, and obviously they have their own agenda. We shouldn't be funding them directly or indirectly. So one easy answer is stop funding any institution that's hostile to our own sovereignty as the United States of America. World Economic Forum, WHO, UN, all fit that description. But as it relates to here, is there's a government nexus to advance that agenda. I mean, that's what NPR actually is.
Yep.
Effectively a government state media arm, that we don't call it that.
Right.
Those vestiges will be gone on my watch, but it's going to take principled allegiance to the Constitution to make sure that we're protecting the First Amendment while sticking to the First Amendment, which I will. Right.
The one thing I would say is you'll probably need alliances and a close relationship with those in the House Appropriations Committee for that defunding, and I'm curious for your coalition's building strategy, given that you may, the voters, I think, support you, and the populist base supports you, but there's an establishmentarian wing of Congress that even if you win, even if you win the presidential, this is something that Trump ran into when he took office.
I guess my first question that I'd want to think about, at least as it relates to cutting off the funding of these organizations, is I do swear an oath to the Constitution. And I think there are certain circumstances in which the U.S. president can say, I cannot disburse the funds to a knowing set of government actions that is directly hostile to the Constitution, at which point we'll be sued for it. We take it to the Supreme Court, but we actually adjudicate the underlying constitutionality of it. So my headspace has already gone in the direction of, my general thought is, it's largely one uniparty in Congress. Anytime we can sort of disintermediate Congress by looking to the Constitution for what the chief executive has to do, is bound by the Constitution to do, then let's do it. And even if that flouts the norms of Washington, D.C., they sue you. We take it to the current Supreme Court, which often agrees with me 6-3 on most of my policy vision for running the federal government. That's actually our way to win. So there's a real-time question. I hadn't thought about it before, but that's where my mind first goes, is to see whether the funding of these sort of independent groups with the government nexus, whether I can take a position that I can't disburse that funding. It all goes through Congress, but it's disbursed through the executive branch. If it violates an oath to the Constitution, almost certainly get sued as a result, but that could be a win because we take it to the Supreme Court and get it right.
And one helpful thing to keep in mind, just as a closing note on that, is now Trump did this 3-4 years too late, but towards the end of 2020, he actually passed an executive order around DEI that functionally prohibited the ability for people who had these DEI programs to be able to qualify in the first place at the threshold level for these government grants and contracts. And that had a massive immediate effect on DEI.
Largely because, and you got to say why. It's not because Trump doesn't like DEI. It's because it's a violation of the existing laws as they already apply. And so that's one of the things where I want us to level up a little bit as a movement, and certainly from the White House, in the rigor and precision that we bring to doing often the right thing, but often in a sloppy way we score our own goals and lose in the courts or otherwise. That's why I'm in this, is I think it's going to take an outsider who, yes, is willing to break glass and totally flout norms when necessary. That's me, and Trump brought that too, to be honest. But it also takes an outsider who knows and deeply understands the law and the Constitution. And I think at this point, that's me. And so that's why I'm in this.
All right. We heard it from him himself. Thanks.
Again, Vivek is like the only candidate talking about these fundamental issues that we have to address. Constitutional issues, government transparency issues. Any candidate who doesn't have a thorough plan to undo the censorship industrial complex shouldn't even be running, in my opinion. They should be disqualified. And that includes Nikki Haley, who, by the way, she actually called for tech censorship legislation at one of the debates. I have no idea how she's even in the running still. All right, that wraps up this episode. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.